It was the kind of headline that freezes time. Most wanted man in Florida captured after ruthless double killing. On a quiet Tuesday night, under the sterile lights of a hospital in Clearwater, Florida, a man named Daryl Whitman lay cuffed to a hospital bed. His face bruised, one eye swollen shut, bandages wrapped around his arms like a mockery of justice. The same man who, just weeks earlier, had shattered two families and left an entire police force in mourning. How did we get here? How does a man go from a troubled past to brutally murdering his pregnant ex-girlfriend and then executing a decorated police officer in broad daylight? This isn't just a story about crime. It's a story about rage, loss, and the thin, fragile line between justice and devastation. Welcome to the tragic case of Daryl Whitman. The arrest was messy. Police had been hunting him for weeks, desperate, exhausted, burning through resources and leads across Florida. When they finally cornered him in an abandoned house, they didn't go in quietly. Witnesses say the officers beat him during the arrest. One report even claimed he lost an eye from the confrontation. But no one was in the mood to argue about excessive force. Not after what he'd done, because by that point, Daryl Whitman wasn't just a fugitive. He was a walking nightmare, the embodiment of grief, betrayal, and cold-blooded murder. Let's rewind. Before the mugshot, before the manhunt, before the funerals and press conferences, Daryl Whitman was just a 41-year-old man with a long criminal record, in and out of the system since his early 20s. Drugs, assaults, weapons charges, a career built on violence and impulse. But in the final months of 2016, something snapped inside him. Maybe it was pride, maybe it was control, maybe it was the realization that his life, full of scars and wrong turns, was spinning further out of control. And at the center of it all was a 24-year-old woman named Kiana Ellis. She was his ex-girlfriend. Young, beautiful, pregnant, carrying his child. Kiana had finally chosen herself. She'd moved on. She wanted to raise her baby without him. But Daryl wasn't ready to let go. And that decision, her right to walk away, would seal her fate. Because Daryl didn't want closure. He wanted domination. And when he couldn't get it, he chose destruction. The state would eventually charge him with 2 murders, Kiana Ellis and her unborn child. But that wasn't enough to satisfy his wrath. Weeks later, when a brave officer named Lieutenant Renee Hall tried to confront him, he pulled the trigger again. This time, in a crowded Walmart parking lot, in front of mothers, children, families running errands, he murdered a uniformed officer. Execution style. No hesitation. Just cold, methodical violence. That moment sent shockwaves through Clearwater. A cop murdered during a routine arrest attempt. A community grieving a pregnant woman and her child. A suspect still on the loose, armed, and unpredictable. People were afraid to leave their homes. Schools increased security. Grocery stores hired off-duty police. Officers wore black bands across their badges in mourning. And through it all, Daryl Whitman vanished like smoke. No trail, no phone, no mistakes. The city was holding its breath, waiting, terrified of what might come next. But now he was caught. His face, once feared, now swollen and hollow under hospital lights. His body restrained, his voice muted by the weight of justice. And yet, there were still so many questions. How did it come to this? Why didn't anyone stop him sooner? Could Kiana, or Lieutenant Hall, have been saved? And most of all, what drives a man to murder the woman carrying his child, then take the life of a police officer sworn to protect others? This is not just a crime story. It's a reckoning. And in the next chapter, we meet the woman who paid the ultimate price, not just with her life, but with the trust she had in the badge she wore with pride. Before we talk about her death, we need to talk about her life. Because Lieutenant Renee Hall wasn't just a badge number. She wasn't just a uniform. She was a mother, a wife, a protector, and a pillar of her community. In Clearwater, Florida, the name Renee Hall meant strength. It meant integrity. It meant compassion backed by courage. And now it means loss. Renee had served with the Clearwater Police Department for 17 years. 17 years of walking into danger while others ran. 17 years of late-night calls, missed holidays, and answering to tragedies no one else wanted to face. 17 years of fighting not just criminals, but hopelessness, fear, and division. She started out, just like many do, fresh from the University of Central Florida, with a dream of making a difference. But what set her apart wasn't just her credentials. It was her character. She rose through the ranks quickly, from officer to sergeant to lieutenant. Not because she was chasing power, but because she led with honesty, toughness, and an unshakable belief in justice that serves everyone. Her fellow officers respected her. Her community adored her. And her family? They saw her as a real-life superhero. Her son, Mason, once said at a memorial service, "Everything she worked for, she died for." She never backed down from what was right, even when it was dangerous. Renee wasn't just enforcing the law. She was bridging the gap between police and people, a bridge built from years of outreach, listening, and genuine connection. At churches, at schools, at neighborhood meetings, she showed up, not as an enforcer, but as a human being in uniform. And that's what makes what happened to her so devastating. She didn't die during a high-speed chase. She didn't fall during a planned raid or SWAT standoff. She was killed doing what she'd always done, protecting the innocent and trying to bring a dangerous man to justice. She heard the call. A tip had come in. Daryl Whitman had been spotted, right there in Clearwater at a local Walmart. She could have waited for backup. She could have passed it off. But that wasn't Renee. She went. Alone. Because that's what leaders do. They don't hide behind rank. They step into the fire. What happened next? We'll cover in painful detail later. But for now, know this. She died on duty. She died bravely. And she died believing she could save lives by stopping a killer. And she was right. She just never got the chance to see it through. Today, outside the Clearwater Police Department, there's a bronze plaque mounted near the main entrance. It reads, "In loving memory of Lieutenant Renee Hall, Guardian of Justice, Voice of the Community, Daughter of Clearwater." Fresh flowers are placed there almost every week. Not by officers, by residents. Children she mentored, grandparents she protected, strangers whose only memory of her is kindness. There's a silence now in the department, a hole that will never be filled. You can feel it in the quiet during shift change. You can feel it in the radio static when her call sign is skipped. And you can feel it in the hearts of her fellow officers, who now wear her name on black mourning bands across their chests. They say every city has a hero. Renee Hall didn't ask to be one, but she became one. Every single day, she laced up her boots and faced the storm. And in the end, it wasn't just bullets that took her away. It was the cost of standing between evil and the innocent. That's what makes this case so much more than crime. It's a tragedy, a betrayal, and a warning. Because when heroes fall, we're left asking, who will stand in their place? It started with a knock on the door. December 13th, 2016. Just 11 days before Christmas. A quiet night in a modest Clearwater neighborhood, where a 24-year-old woman named Kiana Ellis was just trying to move on with her life. She was 7 weeks pregnant, and she had finally found the strength to say no. No to the abuse. No to the manipulation. No to Daryl Whitman, the man who had once called himself her partner, but had become her tormentor. She didn't want him involved. She didn't want drama. She just wanted to raise her child in peace. But Daryl? He couldn't stand the idea of losing control. That night, he showed up at her house, uninvited, agitated, and boiling beneath the surface. Kiana agreed to talk to him just for a few minutes. Maybe she thought he'd calm down. Maybe she believed he could be reasoned with. Or maybe, deep down, she still hoped he could change. But she was wrong. Fatally wrong. Her younger brother, Tyrese, had stopped by that evening. Just a casual visit. Checking on his sister. Making sure things were okay. He saw Daryl outside. He saw the tension. And he didn't like it. What happened next unraveled in seconds, but would haunt the Ellis family for a lifetime. As Kiana and Tyrese tried to re-enter the house, Daryl pulled out a gun. No warnings. No words. Just gunfire. The first shots hit Tyrese in the chest. He collapsed on the porch. Kiana screamed. She tried to run, but she didn't make it far. Daryl shot her multiple times, right there outside her mother's home. Inside the house, her mother, Gloria Ellis, and younger brother, Jalen, heard the gunshots. They ran to the door, hearts pounding, adrenaline surging. They saw Kiana and Tyrese on the ground, bleeding, broken. But before they could reach them, more shots rang out. Daryl turned his gun on them. Jalen instinctively pulled his mother back, slamming the door shut, shielding her body with his own. The bullets tore through the frame. Splinters flew. Screams echoed. Then silence. Daryl fled. He left behind a yard painted in blood. A pregnant woman gasping her final breaths. A family torn open, shattered. And a community that would never forget the sound of those screams. At the hospital, doctors tried everything, but it was too late. Kiana Ellis was gone, and so was the life growing inside her. An unborn child, erased before it even had a name. Tyrese, by some miracle, survived, but the physical wounds were nothing compared to what he'd carry in his heart. At her funeral, the chapel overflowed. There were no TV crews, no headlines yet, just grief. Pure, raw grief. People remembered Kiana as a girl full of fire, stubborn, smart, funny. She loved sunflowers. She made the best banana pudding in the family. She was always the first to laugh and the first to defend someone being mistreated. Now all that light was extinguished in seconds. But Daryl? He didn't stop. He didn't turn himself in. He didn't express remorse. Instead, he disappeared, like smoke. In the days that followed, Clearwater police launched an urgent investigation. They pieced together witness accounts, tracked phone data, scoured known hideouts. But Daryl had vanished. He knew how to lay low, how to change his appearance, how to wait. And that's what made him dangerous. Because you can't reason with someone who feels nothing. At a press conference, Police Chief Leonard Price told reporters, "We're dealing with someone who has no regard for life, not even the life of his own child." The manhunt expanded statewide. Helicopters swept neighborhoods. Undercover units hit the streets. Flyers with a digitally altered, shaved-head version of Daryl's face were posted everywhere. People were scared, terrified, because Daryl wasn't just a suspect. He was a storm without direction. No one knew where he'd strike next. Meanwhile, Daryl's defense attorney began planting seeds. He claimed Daryl acted in self-defense, that Kiana had a gun, that she was threatening him, that this was all a misunderstanding. But the evidence told another story. Ballistics, eyewitnesses, shell casings. None of it matched his version of events. Because there's no defense for shooting a pregnant woman and then firing at her family as they try to help. None. And yet, despite everything, despite the pain, the funerals, the fear, justice still hadn't been served. Because Daryl Whitman was still out there, hiding, watching, waiting, and no one could have predicted that his next target would be a police lieutenant, a woman who had dedicated her life to protecting the very community he tore apart. And when their paths collided, the tragedy wasn't just repeated, it escalated. After the murders of Kiana Ellis and her unborn child, the city of Clearwater descended into a state of paralyzed fear. But Daryl Whitman? He didn't run in panic. He didn't spiral into guilt. He vanished with precision. He slipped into the shadows like someone who had done this before. And maybe he had. Law enforcement moved fast. Within hours of the shooting, warrants were issued. Canvases were launched. Street-level units were activated. They were looking for one man, but he was moving like a ghost. He ditched his phone. He shaved his head. He changed his clothes. He altered his walk. A local officer later admitted, it was like trying to chase smoke through a hurricane. Every lead went cold. Every sighting turned up nothing. But the community? They weren't fooled. They knew what Daryl was. A man who had killed the woman carrying his child and nearly gunned down her family. And worse, he was still out there, somewhere, watching. As the days stretched on, fear festered like a wound. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Clerks at gas stations double-locked their doors. Teachers looked over their shoulders while walking to their cars. Flyers with Daryl's photo, altered to show his shaved head, were everywhere. Even the local news ran emergency segments urging the public to call if they saw him. Tips poured in. False sightings. Hysteria. A man this dangerous, this unpredictable, could be anywhere. The reward for information skyrocketed. Anonymous hotlines were overwhelmed. Each call began with the same trembling words. "I think I saw him," but they hadn't. He was always one step ahead. Chief Leonard Price addressed the public again. "We believe Mr. Whitman is armed, dangerous, and likely receiving help. Do not approach him. Call 911 immediately." That last part struck a nerve. He wasn't alone. Someone was helping him. That was the chilling thought. Was it family? Old friends? Sympathizers? No one knew. But the manhunt, now in its third week, had become a race against the worst-case scenario. Because if he had done this to Kiana, if he had opened fire on her entire family, who would be next? Then a break. January 9th, 2017. A woman called 911 from the parking lot of a Clearwater Walmart. She was calm but firm. "I think I just saw Daryl Whitman. He's wearing a black hoodie. He's walking toward the side entrance." The dispatcher verified her claim. She was familiar with the case. She'd seen his photo a dozen times. This wasn't just another false alarm. This was real. Lieutenant Renee Hall was nearby, finishing up paperwork in her cruiser. The call came through dispatch. She didn't hesitate. She responded immediately. She radioed in, confirmed her route, and drove straight toward the Walmart. No drama, no sit-ins, just a woman on a mission, the same way she'd responded to hundreds of calls before. But this would be her last. Daryl Whitman, now with weeks of practice staying invisible, made a mistake. He let himself be seen. Maybe he was slipping. Maybe the isolation, the hunger, the paranoia, it all got to him. Maybe a part of him didn't care anymore. But he went to that Walmart anyway. And that single decision would lead to the end of the chase. And the start of something even more devastating. Because when Lieutenant Hall pulled into the parking lot, she wasn't thinking about headlines. She wasn't thinking about fame. She wasn't even thinking about danger. She was thinking about justice. And she was thinking about Kiana, the young woman who never got to hold her baby. But what Renee didn't know was that Daryl Whitman wasn't done killing. He had one more bullet to fire, and it was meant for the one person brave enough to come for him. It was supposed to be a routine call, a tip from a concerned citizen, a possible sighting in a crowded Walmart parking lot. Nothing out of the ordinary. But Lieutenant Renee Hall had learned long ago, there's no such thing as routine when you wear the badge. She pulled into the lot just after 7 a.m. It was already warm. Florida sun rising behind the strip mall buildings, casting long shadows across parked cars. She spotted him almost immediately. Daryl Whitman, black hoodie, baggy jeans, walking with the casual stride of a man who thought he was still invisible. But she saw him, and she knew. Renee stepped out of her cruiser. She didn't wait. She didn't hesitate. With trained precision, she drew her weapon and called out, "Daryl Whitman, police. Drop to your knees now." Witnesses say the lot froze. Shoppers stopped mid-step. Carts rolled to a standstill. Children clung to their mothers' legs as everyone instinctively ducked for cover. But Daryl? He didn't flinch. He turned, and for a split second, just one, their eyes locked. Did she see fear in his face? Or is it something else? Something darker? Resolve? Resentment? Whatever it wasn't surrender. Because in that moment, Daryl raised his weapon, and without saying a word, he opened fire. The first shot hit Renee in the side. She stumbled but didn't go down. She fired back. 2 rounds. One at his arm. He flinched, but kept coming. Bam! Bam! 2 more shots from Daryl's gun. Renee dropped to one knee, clutching her side. Still aiming. Still fighting. Still doing her job. Then came a final shot. Cold. Calculated. Close range. He walked up to her as she lay on the pavement and shot her in the neck. Execution style. In broad daylight. Silence. That's how Lieutenant Renee Hall died. Not in a gunfight. Not in the chaos of a standoff. But on the ground alone. After doing what she'd sworn to do. Protect her community from evil. She didn't cry out. She didn't beg. She didn't run. She stood her ground. Right to the bitter, bloody end. The scene quickly descended into chaos. Calls flooded 911. Officers swarmed the area within minutes. But Daryl was already gone, slipping into the maze of residential backstreets behind the shopping center. He'd vanished again, But this time, the cost was unbearable. Back at the Clearwater Police Department, the radio was silent. Dispatch tried to reach Renee. Once, twice, then a third time. Unit 19, Lieutenant Hall, status check. No response, just static. And in that stillness, hearts sank, because they already knew. By the time backup arrived and EMTs reached her body, she was gone. Face down, gun still in her hand, eyes open, staring into a sky that would never see her smile again. The news broke like a bomb. Every station, every channel. Lieutenant Renee Hall killed in the line of duty while pursuing murder suspect Daryl Whitman. People cried openly in the streets. Officers held each other in stunned silence. At the Walmart entrance, customers placed flowers on the sidewalk. Mothers wept while explaining to their kids that the nice officer they always saw at school assemblies wasn't coming back. The mayor issued a statement. The governor offered condolences. But no words felt big enough to hold the weight of the loss. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was an assassination of a cop, a mother, a symbol. Chief Leonard Price appeared on the evening news, barely holding back tears. We lost one of our finest today. A warrior, a friend, a leader. Lieutenant Hall died protecting this city, and we will never forget her sacrifice. But for many, the grief came with fury. How had Daryl gotten away? Why was he still breathing when she was in the morgue? Where was the justice? That night, across Clearwater, porch lights were turned on and left burning. A quiet vigil to honor Renee. In the middle of the police department's break room sat her coffee mug. Still full, still warm. No one dared move it, because doing so meant accepting that she wasn't walking back through that door. And yet, through the morning, a fire was lit. The manhunt intensified with relentless force. Every street was checked, every camera reviewed, every resource activated. Because this wasn't just about catching a fugitive now. This was about avenging a fallen sister. This was about sending a message to every officer, every victim, every frightened family in Clearwater. We will not stop until he is caught. What I didn't know, Daryl was hiding closer than anyone imagined, in a place no one thought to look, until it was nearly too late. For 8 long days, Clearwater was a city on edge. A decorated police officer had been executed. A pregnant woman had been gunned down. And the man responsible was still out there, hidden, angry, unrepentant. Daryl Whitman wasn't just a wanted man now. He was a symbol of everything the city feared. And everyone, police, citizens, even criminals, wanted him found. Tips continued pouring in. Search teams were stretched thin. Helicopters circled neighborhoods around the clock. SWAT teams kicked in doors. But still nothing. Until January 17th, 2017. A breakthrough. A local woman, nervous, voice trembling, called in a tip. I think he's hiding in the old house on Delaney Street. It's boarded up. Looks abandoned. But I saw movement in there. Within minutes, tactical units mobilized. No sirens. No announcements. Just the heavy silence of revenge disguised as justice. When officers breached the house, they found him, Daryl Whitman, cornered, alone, unarmed. What happened next would spark outrage and debate across the country. Because when they pulled him out, he wasn't walking. He was dragged, his face bloodied, his eyes swollen shut, his arms twisted behind his back. By the time he arrived at the hospital, he looked like he had survived a war. And in some ways, he had. Photographs of Daryl's injuries leaked online. Public opinion split down the middle. Some called it excessive force, police brutality, a failure of due process. But others? They cheered. They said, he murdered a pregnant woman. He executed a cop. Let him bleed. The city didn't argue. It was too tired, too raw. Everyone just wanted this nightmare to end. From his hospital bed, cuffed and silenced, Daryl finally faced his charges. First-degree murder, attempted murder, killing an unborn child, aggravated assault with a firearm, possession of a weapon as a felon, carjacking, and most devastating of all, the premeditated execution of Lieutenant Renee Hall. In court, Daryl sat stone-faced, unmoved, unrepentant, emotionless, until sentencing day. That's when he spoke. And what he said left the courtroom frozen. I know what y'all been doing. Y'all been trying to kill me from day one. You poison the jury. You poison the media. Ain't nobody care what really happened." He looked over at his family, tears in their eyes, and muttered, "I love y'all. Don't cry." And then, with chilling calm, he renounced his right to a separate sentencing hearing. "I don't need it. Do what you're going to do. I'm ready." The jury deliberated for hours. And when the verdict came back, guilty on every count, Darrell Whitman was sentenced to death. But even that felt hollow, because no verdict, no sentence, no matter how final, could bring Kiana, her unborn child, or Lieutenant Renee Hall back. The courtroom didn't erupt in celebration. There were no cheers, only quiet, the kind of silence that follows a funeral. Outside, reporters asked Councilwoman Lisa Granger how the city would move forward. She said Renee was about to launch a foundation that would bring officers and residents closer together. She believed in healing. She believed in peace. That's how we honor her. We keep building. Chief Leonard Price added, "Nothing we do today can undo what happened. But we hope, we pray, that this brings a measure of peace to those who've suffered." But peace is complicated, because for the families involved, there will always be empty chairs at the table. Always be what-ifs. Always be the ache of lives stolen too soon. For Renee's husband, every morning now begins in silence. For Kiana's mother, the sound of a baby crying cuts deeper than a blade. For Tyrese, who survived Darrell's bullets, the guilt is unbearable. And for the officers who watched Renee Hall rise through the ranks with pride, there's a new edge in their eyes, a weight in their steps, because they know what it cost. They know that bravery sometimes leads not to medals, but to gravestones. The courtroom was packed. Reporters, police officers in uniform, families of the victims, strangers from Clearwater and beyond, drawn to witness the final act in a case that had gripped the state in terror and heartbreak. Darrell Whitman sat at the defense table in a faded suit and shackles. His face was gaunt, his eyes empty, but the evidence? Overwhelming. The prosecution opened with one word: premeditated. They painted the picture for the jury, not just of two murders, but of a man so consumed by control that he chose to end lives instead of facing rejection. Kiana Ellis, a pregnant woman, gunned down in front of her own home. Her unborn child, never given a chance to breathe. Her brother Tyrese, left with bullet wounds and permanent trauma. And weeks later, Lieutenant Renee Hall, a decorated officer, murdered execution style as she tried to apprehend him. The state presented ballistics that matched the shell casings to Darrell's weapon. Autopsy reports showing the fatal shots to Kiana's torso and Renee's neck. Witness testimony from neighbors, relatives, and even former acquaintances who confirmed Darrell's anger and threats. They called it what it was: cold-blooded, calculated, cowardly. But the defense? They tried to muddy the waters, claimed self-defense in the shooting of Kiana, said she had a gun, that a struggle ensued. They challenged the timeline, raised questions about Darrell's mental state. But there were no fingerprints on a second weapon, no proof Kiana was armed, and no justification for the 4 shots fired into Lieutenant Hall, especially the one he fired while standing over her. The jury didn't buy it. No one did. Then came the most haunting moment of the trial. Mason Hall, Renee's son, took the stand. He was only 16. His voice trembled as he spoke. "She wasn't just a cop. She was my mom. She helped kids stay out of trouble. She always told me, be better than your anger. And now she's gone because someone else couldn't do the same." The room was silent. Not even the judge spoke for a full minute after Mason stepped down. Closing arguments burned with fire and fury. The prosecution's final words: "You're not just deciding guilt. You are defending the value of human life. A pregnant woman, a police officer, a child who never got to be born. Don't let their names fade under the shadow of this man's violence." And then the wait. For hours. That's all it took. For hours of deliberation before the jury returned. Guilty on all 5 charges related to Kiana Ellis and her unborn child. First-degree murder. Murder of an unborn child. Attempted murder of her brother. Aggravated assault on her mother. Armed carjacking in his escape. And then Guilty. On the execution of Lieutenant Renee Hall. First-degree murder. Use of a firearm during a felony. Possession of a firearm by a felon. The judge read each verdict slowly, deliberately. Daryl said nothing. Not a twitch. Not a tear. Not a flicker of emotion. But in the back row of the courtroom, Renee's husband lowered his head and wept. Finally. He had waited too long for that sound. That word. Guilty. Sentencing came next. And again, Daryl surprised everyone. He stood. He looked directly at the judge and said, "I don't want a hearing. I'm ready for my judgment. You've already made up your minds." And then to his family, "I love you. Don't cry for me. I ain't scared." Cold. Detached. Like it wasn't real. Like the lives he took didn't matter. But they did. And the sentence reflected that. Death. The judge was clear. This court finds the crimes to be heinous, calculated, and carried out with no regard for life or law. You will face the maximum penalty allowed by the state. Outside, reactions poured in. Some cried. Some applauded. Others simply stood in silence, holding photos of Kiana, of Renee, of that tiny ultrasound that would never become a child. There was no joy, only gravity, because justice, no matter how right, cannot fill a coffin. It cannot undo a bullet, and it cannot bring back a heartbeat once it's silenced. Reporters called it the trial that shook the state. But for the families, it wasn't about headlines. It was about closure, about dignity, about truth finally spoken aloud. And yet, as the courtroom emptied, one question lingered in the air. Was it enough? Did justice win? Or did everyone lose something that day? Soft, reflective music fades in. Justice was served. The gavel came down. The sentence was delivered. Daryl Whitman would die in prison. But was that justice? Or just the end of the paperwork? Because justice doesn't dry tears. It doesn't rock a child to sleep at night. It doesn't turn back time or stop nightmares or repair the lives that were torn apart. So yes, justice came. But peace? That never showed up. Let's talk about what was left behind. Kiana Ellis, 24 years old. A young woman with a stubborn smile and dreams bigger than her circumstances. She was going to be a mother. She had just started painting again. She wanted to open a home daycare. She had finally left a toxic man and was planning baby names. All gone. One man's ego. One man's rage. One man's need to control what no longer belonged to him. She never got to hold her baby. Never got to hear a heartbeat again. Never got the future she fought for. Her mother, Gloria, still sets a place at the table for her every Christmas. Her brother, Tyrese, who survived the shooting, he still walks with a limp. Not from the bullet wound, from the trauma. He can't walk down that street without hearing the gunshots. Can't look at his own newborn daughter without thinking about the niece or nephew he never met. Lieutenant Renee Hall, 17 years of service. Thousands of hours in the line of fire, and she dies in a parking lot, trying to stop a killer. She wasn't just an officer. She was a mentor, a neighbor, a mom, a friend. She once bought groceries for a single mother during a domestic call. She showed up to funerals. She wrote handwritten birthday cards to the kids on her beat. She believed in the people, even when they didn't believe in the badge. And that's what was stolen. Not just her life, her legacy in motion. The police department tried to recover. They renamed a training center in her honor. They retired her badge number. They wore ribbons, gave speeches, lit candles. But the locker she used still sits empty. No one touches it, not out of respect, but because no one wants to feel the weight of what was lost. In the months that followed, Clearwater changed. More security, more suspicion, more pain. And behind every shift briefing was her name. Lieutenant Hall, spoken like a prayer or a warning. Councilwoman Lisa Granger, a close friend of Renee's, said it best. Renee didn't just protect the city. She believed in fixing it, bridging the gap between law enforcement and the community. She died trying to stop division, and we owe it to her not to let it grow. So the city created the Hall Foundation, a nonprofit focused on community policing, scholarships for minority youth, and trauma recovery for victims of gun violence. And every May, they hold a memorial run in her honor. Not a sprint, not a competition, just a reminder that when one of us falls, the rest must carry forward. As for Daryl Whitman, he sits in a solitary cell. No visitors, no epides, just silence. Some say he talks to himself. Some say he's still convinced the world was out to get him. Some say he feels nothing at all. But the truth? No one really cares, because what he feels now is irrelevant. What he did will echo forever. Sometimes the worst evil doesn't wear a mask. It doesn't stalk in the night. Sometimes it walks up to your door, knocks, smiles, and pulls the trigger. So where do we go from here? How do we rebuild? How do we protect the next Kiana? The next Renee? The truth is, we can't always stop evil, but we can choose to remember, to speak their names, to teach their stories, to build a world where heroes are honored while they're still alive, and women are safe to say no without fear of being buried for it. Music swells softly. To the families of Kiana Ellis and Lieutenant Renee Hall, we remember you. To every officer who walks into danger with a target on their back, we see you. To every survivor who lives with the weight of what if, we stand with you. And to the rest of us, let this be more than a headline. Let it be a warning. Let it be a reckoning. Let it be a vow. Not again. Not ever again. Piano fades to silence. Thank you for watching. This has been the story of Daryl Whitman, Kiana Ellis, and Lieutenant Renee Hall. A story of justice served, but peace still searching.